Good morning, everyone. It's a privilege to be here, and it's good to see your smiling faces. Okay, prayer's done. Get rid of that. This is a butterfly. Does anyone know what this butterfly is? It's an Australian butterfly, and it's at risk of being extinct. And in size, it's about the size of your thumb across. It's a very small butterfly. Apparently, they only fly about a metre above the ground. It's called a purple copper butterfly. And its main habitat is in New South Wales, okay? It's special. Let's contemplate this butterfly and we think of the theory of evolution. Here's another picture of it. It's a gorgeous creature, isn't it? Absolutely beautiful. Now, the problem with the butterfly, you can't probably read that very well, is that to survive, it has what's called a mutual relationship with an ant. If you kill the ant, the butterfly dies out. And there's a blackthorn bush, which is what this caterpillar of this butterfly eats. And the butterfly lays its eggs on the bush or around it. And if you read that, you'll see. And what happens is that this ant watches over these eggs. And once they hatch, the ant takes the little caterpillars and puts them in its nest. And next night, the ant picks the caterpillars up and puts them back on the bush so they can eat. And by morning, the caterpillars are back inside the ant's nest. And the ant, having guarded these for something like 14 to 17 days, these caterpillars eat and they get fat, and then they turn into the final cycle, into the cocoon. And the ants look after the cocoons in their nest. The butterflies become butterflies, go out of the nest, fly around and mate, lay more eggs, and the same cycle continues. Now, isn't that a mystery that there is this relationship between these ants and this butterfly is so close that they totally look after these butterflies throughout the whole stages of their life. And in the time when they're in danger, which is during the daytime, they put them in the nest to keep them safe. Isn't it fantastic? How can that sit very well with the theory of the survival of the fittest? You know, one would have thought that the ants, having seen the eggs, would have taken them to the nest and eaten them, or alternatively, certainly when the baby caterpillars are out, you know, they would have at some point eaten them. So you can see it's a fantastic story, isn't it? And it's one of these great mysteries of creation which defies the underlying tenets of the theory of evolution. So we go on now. I want you to come to the experience of the Passover, the first Passover, right? There they were. They'd eaten the meal, and the day afterwards they were free. It was the first day of their life that they were free. Every other day of their life, they had had to work. Since they were strong enough to work, they had had to work the whole of their lives. You know? And then suddenly, they have the opportunity of gaining freedom. Suddenly they have the opportunity of just doing what they like. And you can see that what the record says is that they gathered together as a people, as all the tribes. And the record is clear that the next day, which was the Sabbath, they rested. And they couldn't do work because then there was a week of rest. There was, immediately after the Passover, there was a Sabbath, a week of rest where they didn't have to do anything. And they kept the feast of the unleavened bread. And it's interesting to note that the day after the Passover became a Sabbath, and this is an aside here. This is totally irrelevant to the lesson, right? But in this text, which talks about this experience of what you should do in the Passover, there is this little adjunct at the bottom of it, which to me almost is so profound that it moves me to tears, is that you shall not cook the Passover meal or any animal in what? In the milk of its mother. So why is that? Why is that a law? What's so important about that? It's an express prohibition. Why not? Have you thought about that? You see, there's an element to the law which no other code of conduct picks up. It's the element of decency. It is fundamentally indecent to cook a creature in the milk that was made to sustain that creature. God cannot abide that. And you can see how beautifully and profound. It's got no moral basis at all. It's just that it's indecent. And your God requires us, you and us, to behave in a decent way. Okay? And isn't it beautifully profound? So, back to the thing. So the other important thing to note is that when two Sabbaths can coincide, as was that first Feast of Unleavened Bread, it's called a High Sabbath. And you can see that John talks about it. John sort of incidentally talks about it when he talks about the crucifixion sequence. He says, it was a day of preparation, that the bodies should not remain on the cross on the Sabbath. For the Sabbath was a high day. That Sabbath was a high day. The Jews asked Pilate that they might be broken and they might be taken away, the legs, right? So you can see that was important to the Jews. It's a paradox that they're so important about observance of the law, to demand that these people be taken down for the cross after the underlying injustice of the whole process. And you can see also that it's a high Sabbath because what it is, it's a Sabbath where the festive Sabbath coincides with the Sabbath. So that becomes a double Sabbath, as it were. And that's a high day, okay? It also applies Deuteronomy chapter 23:21. If a man has committed a sin deserving of death and he is put to death and you hang him on a tree, his body shall not remain overnight on the tree, but you shall surely bury him that day, so that you do not defile the land which the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. For he who is hung is accursed of God. Now, this again is the principle of decency. The Romans, when they killed them, they would leave these people on the cross for months to rot. And as you walked by, their bodies would stink and everything. But it was a reminder of terror. It was a reminder that if you misbehave, this is what's going to happen to you. But you see, our God, that's indecent. It's just not something that a decent person should do. If the guy's dead, bury him. Don't leave him hanging on a tree overnight. God cannot abide that. And you can see that it's incredible beauty in the law. Noting as we do, as an aside, that the festive Sabbaths no longer apply. So let no one judge you in your food or in drink or regarding the festival or a new moon or Sabbath. The Sabbaths are gone. But the other important thing about this, and this is probably slightly out of context in my sermon, and I ask you this question. The women who witnessed the events rested on the Sabbath in obedience with the commandment. So what happened is that he's crucified, he's taken away, he's placed in the tomb, right? And why didn't they embalm him? Why didn't they prepare his body for burial that day, that night, after he had died? Why didn't they do that? Because it was the Sabbath. You can see that the importance is that here we have the Son of God. Here we have the Messiah. Here we have someone who should be properly entombed. Surely we can make an exception, given the noble and royal status of the individual in question. No, they didn't. They kept the Sabbath first before they began the embalming process. Isn't that impressive? So let's go back to the encampment. So what happens, you imagine this place where they would encamp. And it wasn't just an ad hoc mob of people. What happened is that each tribe would raise its flag, and each particular tribe would gather to the standards of each of the people that had been collected. And here we talk about what's called the division of Judah. And the division of Judah involves the tribes of Judah, Issachar and Zebulun. And they were collected together in one division, but there were 3 tribes within that division. And can you imagine that situation where the standards are flying? You're going to find your tribe. You're going to freedom. You're going to everything. And you're meeting people that you know about, but which you've probably never met in your life. What a situation of rejoicing. And you can see that the numbers of these people are truly significant. Judah had 74,600. Issachar, 54,400. Zebulun, 57,400. And so the divisions simply of the eastern division of the people of Israel was 186,400. And the same applies across the board. You have the south, you have the divisions of Reuben. Reuben includes Simeon and Gad. So the whole of that division, the southern division of the encampment, was 151,450 people. And then you go on to the western division. The western division is Ephraim. And Ephraim has Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin. And the total number in that encampment is 108,100. And then you go on to the north. The north we have Dan, and those in Dan, Dan includes Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. So again, you have 157,600 people. Now, you got a massive number of people. As the text indicates, they were 603,550, not including the Levites. The Levites were not to be counted. So, and it says that so that the Israelites did everything the Lord commanded Moses that day. They encamped under their standard, and in the way that they set out, each of them with their clan and family, so that when they went forward, it would be next time. It's probably got this off the internet, but you can see that Judah here goes first, then it's followed by Reuben, then it's followed by Levi, then it's followed by Ephraim, and then it's followed by Dan. I think that's right. I'm not sure Ephraim and Dan. It might be the other way around. But the important thing is that everyone had a standard, everyone had a clan, everyone had a thing. And you can imagine how God's heart would have leapt with joy when he saw his people gathered together as a nation. He would have been so delighted, don't you reckon? And not only were they together, there was what was called the riffraff. Now, riffraff is an Egyptian word that comes down to us. I don't know what is riffraff Polish, or doesn't get through in Polish. But when they came to translate the King James, which is a benchmark translation in the English language, they had a whole lot of words that they didn't know how to translate properly. So what they did is they transliterate them. They just put that word in as it sounded. And some of the words were very contentious. So rather than try and pick an English word, They again transliterated the word straight into the English language, things like redeemer and all that. They were so contentious that rather than enter into a theological argument in the translation, they just dumped the word straight into the English language. Or put it into the Bible, which effectively dumped it into the English language. And the riffraff are in it, the assembled multitude are in addition to this. So you've got this huge group of people moving, right? You imagine I probably estimated that this encampment would have taken something like 200 hectares to encamp this nation in one spot. You know, it was a mass of people. And we sort of have in mind that they go out into the desert and camp. They didn't. They encamped in farmland, in pasture land. They don't. You can see when they start arriving at the desert, because it talks about the coming of manna, which is later on, okay? And remember that North Africa at the time, you know, the Sahara Desert didn't exist. The Sahara Desert was made by the Romans. What they did, they kept harvesting and harvesting and harvesting until the desert turned up. Just the same as in the Eyre Peninsula, we're harvesting and harvesting, chopping down trees, harvesting, and now a desert's coming down into the Eyre Peninsula. So it's the same process. So the whole of North Africa would have been quite abundant, and they moved out. So here we have the tribes, and you can see with it that they have gems. Each tribe has its own particular gem, okay? And so you can see that Moses is told to make a breastplate on which these things are set in 4 rows across the plate. In the first row, you can see there's a series of carnelian, topaz, emerald. That represents tribes, and then so forth down. I won't sort of hold you up by going that. You can look that up yourself. But here is a representation of it where the name and the gem are linked, okay? But so the importance of this was that if there was a special commandment to a particular tribe, the gem that related to that tribe would light up. So it was a guidance as to involvement in terms of directions from God. And here you've got the tribe of Joseph, and you haven't got Ephraim or Manasseh. Why is it that Ephraim and Manasseh are not on the breastplate? We got an answer? Pardon? Yeah, they're the tribe of Joseph. So Ephraim and Manasseh were 2 of his children, or probably, I don't know if they're the only children, but they gave rise to 2 tribes, okay? So that in actual fact, when you look at this, the encampment, you can see there's actually a total of 13 tribes there at the time. But what that's doing is dividing the tribe of Joseph in 2, okay? So we get the jewels, and you can see if you go over to the New Testament, can't you, that this is taken up in the book of Revelation. It says, the city shimmered like the precious gem, light-filled, pulsating light. She had a wall majestic and high with 12 gates, and each gate and so forth. And it goes through to each side. You know, each side has a gate. This is an allusion to the encampment, right? So the gates on the east represents Judah. I'll put that in. The 3 gates on the north represent the 3 tribes to the north, which represents Dan. 3 gates on the south represents 3 tribes on the south, which is Reuben, the Reuben division. 3 gates on the west represents the tribes of Joseph or Ephraim, as the Bible calls them Ephraim. But you can see that the heavenly city, the gates of the heavenly city, take up the notion of the encampment of the Israelite people. And it talks about the wall, and I won't sort of go in, time doesn't permit, but you can see there that this city is based on gems. Right? What does that mean? These gems are the gems that represent the children of Israel. What does it mean? that what? The city of God is based on us. It symbolises that the city of God, heaven, is based on the people of God. It's based on Israel. It's based on us. Okay? And then it goes on, going back to the encampment. Then it talks about the Lord's appointed festivals. They are to proclaim the appointed times. The Passover begins at twilight on the 14th day of the first month. On the 15th day of the month, the Lord's festival unleavened bread begins. For 7 days you must eat bread made out of yeast. On the first day, hold a sacred assembly and do no regular work. For 7 days, food offerings to the Lord. And on the 7th day, hold a sacred assembly and do no regular work. So you can see that on the 7 days, the first day and the last day are special Sabbaths, okay, which is what John is talking about, the High Sabbath. Now, why does this festival begin on the 15th day of the month? It's because they had to travel to Jerusalem, and you get a full moon, and it's easier to walk. If you have to walk partly at night, it's easier to encamp if you've got a full moon. You know, you've got plenty of light. So it's set up at a time which is most appropriate in order to carry out the tasks that are asked of them. So it's reasonable to conclude that while they were in Egypt, they wouldn't have moved on the first day after the Passover. They wouldn't have moved on the last day, but they would have moved through Egypt. And what the record describes is that then the Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites to turn back. See, to turn back carries with it an assumption that they were moving, okay? And encamp near a city, and no point going to those. And the Pharaoh will think the Israelites are wandering around the land in confusion, hemmed in by the desert. And after a week, you can see that the grief of losing your children, his first son, is gone, and it's been replaced with anger and a desire for revenge. And the reality of not having someone take out your toilet waste and clean your house and dig your garden in the hot sun and all the rest is set in. So these people become revengeful, and so it is that we have the crossing of the Red Sea. And now if we jump forward, 50 days of journey in the desert, they come to Mount Sinai, okay? It's here that the elders see God. Then Moses went up, also Aaron, Nab, and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and they saw the God of Israel. And there was under his feet, as it were, a paved work of what? Sapphire. And it was like the very heavens in its clarity. So this is an incredibly clear, like looking into the bluest sky, this sapphire that God was standing on. It's an impressive thing. And remember that you have what is essentially a parallel, because you have the first Passover, and at the second, at Pentecost, 50 days later, Pentecost is the Greek word for 50, there comes the law. You have the second significant Passover, which is the death of our Messiah. And 50 days later, what comes? The Holy Spirit. You can see the direct link between the two. Okay? And that's just not a coincidence. That was all done. And you can extrapolate that the first... Excuse me, I just need to take my coat off. That the first... You can confidently say the first Passover occurred on the Sabbath because of its parallel. We know that the second Passover occurred on the Sabbath. Okay? We know that the second Pentecost occurred on a Sabbath. It's 50 days. See, if the Passover was on a Friday, 50 days on from that will be a Sabbath. So the Pentecost occurs on the Sabbath, And so we can assume, therefore, that the law, and why wouldn't it be the case? Why would you give the law at any other time than on the Sabbath? And so the other thing interesting is that in the giving of the law, this is the only occasion in anybody's history where the revelation of God is a public revelation. You see, with all the other prophets and all the other stuff, it's a revelation that comes to a private single individual. On this occasion, the expression of the divine comes to the whole nation. Okay, it's also, and one of the problems we have is we have the prejudice of subsequent knowledge. You see, these people, we know, like, for example, if you say, look, there's a man who's travelled to the moon, it's a big deal. We know. But if you said that occurred in about 1969, if you said that in 1900, people would have been absolutely astounded. Same about the law. What God did on Sinai, now we've lost, because of the history, the true significance. This is the first time that there had been a religion without an idol. Every other religion had an idol. God didn't take them to a place where there was a special idol. He took them to a place to tell them about him, to make an agreement with them. There was no idol there. In fact, his throne covers his word, isn't it? What he sits on in his throne in the temple is his word. The Ark of the Covenant, it's not an ark of special magic jewels or special little symbols or special little chants. It's unique. No one, and we've lost that. And you compare that with the golden calf, the golden calf, as the Psalm says, is just, they worship an animal that eats grass. Okay? And that's what the Psalm is saying is, you worship an animal that eats grass, and yet you've seen the magnificence of God. You've seen the magnificence of the law. I think sometimes we do that. When we forsake God, we're effectively worshipping an animal that simply eats grass. And the important thing about Psalms, this is totally digressing, the quote that we had comes from Psalms 106. It has to have been written 400 years after the event in question. Can't be any earlier. What's significant about, if you read the whole of Psalm 106, what is significant about that? What is unique that comes to these people that no other people has up and until this time? It is that history is warts and all. 400 years later, you don't whitewash over your mistakes. You actually write a psalm which sets out all of your mistakes. It is totally unique. It's not a sanitized version of history. It's direct and it's blunt, and it is faithful to the truth. And that is unique to these people. You go back to any other history, it's always sanitized, right? But to these people, it isn't. And one of the fights of historians is to remove the sanitization. You take, for example, the Holocaust. There's an attempt to sanitize the event, to cover it up. Historians are continually prizing away to show the enormity of the crime. And so we go on. We have the, what's the Ten Commandments? He wrote the commandments on a tablet, and that is the essence of the presence of God. That is the memento, the physical object that remains from the revelation of God at that point in time. And so what's incredibly significant about that? What is so special? It is, as I've alluded to, that the importance of God is not an object. It's not a benefit. The importance of God is what he stands for. It's his word is the essence. It is simply what he says that's the most critical thing. And John takes it up, doesn't he? In the beginning was what? The Word. And the Word was with God. And the Word was God. Okay? You can see which is a reference. And then the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. You can see here that John captures this essence. In the beginning, let us make. Here is the Word of God. Throughout it all, the essence of the experience, the essence of our relationship is through God's Word. And John captures that so brilliantly. He also captures it when John's writing his gospel, he's writing his gospel to convince other people to accept Christ. And he doesn't write about how magnificent Christ is. He doesn't write about in the destruction in the Old Testament. He doesn't write about any of that. He calls Christ what? The bread, the light, the truth, the way, the vine. He describes his God without any reference to majesty and greatness. He describes his God according to what God stands for. And that's it. Okay? And the other important thing to remember with this law is that this is phenomenal. You get people, I'm embarrassed about the law. That says I'm Judaizing and all that sort of thing. It's nonsense. The law, let me tell you, right? The law is phenomenal. There is nothing written by any ancient people that ever equals it. I've read a lot. You can be assured that I haven't found anything anywhere that compares. And the reason, it is splendid. And the other thing is that the Ten Commandments are paramount, right? With lawyers, you have, say, two sources of authority. You have, say, in Australia, the Commonwealth Parliament, you have the state parliament, you have local government, all passing laws which have to be complied with. Sometimes they conflict. When they conflict, you have what's called the concept of paramountcy. When there's a conflict between a Commonwealth law and a state government law, the Commonwealth law applies. So the same applies spiritually. Whenever you interpret the Bible, the paramount provision applies, and every other comment is subject to the paramount provision. The most direct expression of God's word is the Ten Commandments. It sits absolutely as the paramount, and anything Paul talks about, anything Jesus talks about, anything the prophets talk about is subject to the paramount declaration. Okay? It's also the word there for commandments, which is often translated as the words of the covenant. It says the Ten Commandments in Exodus 34:28. The actual word is not command. It can be translated commandments, but it is also translated as word. Okay, and it's from there that you get the Decalogue, because what happened was it's quite proper. The original Hebrew word is word, but it can be commandment, it can be statement. Okay, the translation's not wrong, but the other translation permitted is word. Okay. And it's clear that what happens is that they shorten it in the Greek to the 10 words, the Decalogue, okay? And I've got stuff here I won't go into because it'll just take too long, but that comes from the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament, which is our oldest record of the Old Testament. If they say that whatever is the Septuagint conflicts with the Hebrew, you've got to remember that that's earlier than the Hebrew. It exists at an earlier point in time. I just want to move past that because time doesn't permit. But you can see an interesting here is an example in Isaiah 7. It says in the Greek, it says that a virgin, LXX is 70 in Latin, okay, right? So that's often when you see writing about it, instead of writing the full word, they just write LXX, okay, meaning the same thing. But you can see that in the Greek, the word is virgin. In the Hebrew, the word is young woman. And you can see that waters it down. But the word virgin, which Matthew picks up and quotes, he quotes the Greek from a Greek translation. He, behold, the virgin will be with child. Okay. The word virgin is more authentic than the word young woman. Okay? So it is important. So moving back, I won't... What in essence is that the Ten Commandments became known as the Decalogue, and it's even in Hebrew, it's the Decalogue. You pick up any Hebrew text discussion, it's the Decalogue, okay? It's become synonymous, which means 10 words. And so when we come to Jesus, he's confronted about this, and he says, you can see in Matthew chapter 5, 17 and 18, for I say unto you, until heaven and earth pass, not one jot or tittle shall in no wise pass from the law till all be fulfilled. Now, a jot is the smallest letter of the Hebrew. In English, it's the smallest letter. It's a jot. But it's also in Hebrew. It is the smallest letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And it translates, it is a corruption of the word Jod or Joder, which comes into English through Greek, where the J turns into an I. Often the case that what is I in Greek becomes J in English, okay? So it's the smallest word. And if you go to this is the Hebrew alphabet, okay? So you can see that's right. You see it up there in the corner? Right? And it's important. What is the sequence of Jod in the Hebrew alphabet? Is it the first letter of the alphabet? No, it's the 10th. Because they read, quite incorrectly and stupidly, they read from right to left. That's unjustified. But you can see, therefore, that it's the 10th. So when Christ says, not one jot, he's saying, not one of the 10th. But not only is he saying not one of the 10th, he's saying the smallest commandment, the least significant commandment shall not pass. Not one of the 10, one of the Decalogue shall not pass. And if you read it literally, refers to the 10th letter. We know it refers to the 10th letter because of the Psalms, because the Psalms list themselves off alphabetically. So by reading the Psalms, you can actually work out the sequence of letters in the Hebrew alphabet. Okay, it's quite a simple process. And like the Roman, like the Greek, like all of those things, these people didn't have symbols for numbers. So the numbers they would pick up characters out of their language and use those to represent numbers. And the number 10 in the Hebrew alphabet, as you saw, is a jot, okay? Is this little symbol, is number 10. So if you ever wanted to write 10 figs, you just use that, okay? So, and if you go back back to what Christ actually said. It is, truly I say to you, until shall pass away, this is the actual literal translation, until shall pass away the heaven and the earth, iota one or one stroke of a letter shall not pass away from the law until everything shall happen. So it's not a question of fulfillment. It says, until everything shall happen. In other words, it doesn't mean until the time of the crucifixion. It means until the coming of the heavenly city. Okay? Nothing shall pass away. And I'll just rush through this, time's getting away. So in the gospel, there's 7 occasions where the Messiah is confronted about the Sabbath. There's the ears of corn, you're all familiar with that. And human need overrides the law. There's the healing of a man with a withered hand. There's no challenge to the law itself in this discussion. In fact, the wording assumes its relevance. The woman bowed down with infirmity. Jesus responds saying, they untie and give water to their animals on the Sabbath, saying this is equivalent to that. If you give your animal water, can't you heal someone? It's more important. And the second thing is that it was the destruction of the work of Satan, so it was justified. Both those answers assume the continuation of the Sabbath. Number 4 is the healing of the man after questioning the Pharisees. Now, this is very important because on this occasion, he's confronting the experts of the law. He's confronting the guys that really know about it. The experts offered no reply and shows that they agreed with this, that it wasn't breaking of the Sabbath. So once he gave his explanation, that was the end of the argument. Okay? There's no record in the Gospels of them saying, but what about this or what about that? It all assumes the existence of the Sabbath. The healing of the man at the pool with 38 years of illness by asking him to take up his bed and walk, which is apparently breaking the Sabbath, but it's not in essence. You're entitled to locate and live. You know, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. He's accused of working on the Sabbath. He says that he is working just as his father is working. Okay? It's lawful to do God's work on the Sabbath. It assumes a binding obligation of the Sabbath. And it's interesting that the text records that they want to kill him. You know, he's healed a guy who's been crook for 38 years and they want to kill him. You can see how perverse sin makes us. We've got to be careful. We can throw stones at these people, but we live in glass houses. We can become just as perverse in our lives. These things are said not for us to mock and hate these people. These things are said for us to learn that in our own life we don't make the same mistakes. So, and then 6 says the healing of man on the Sabbath, John chapter 9. It's interesting to note that Jesus always attended the synagogue on the Sabbath. Paul always attended the synagogue on the Sabbath. Neither of them departed from that. And when they sought to kill him, there was no allegation that he had broken the Sabbath. In his trial before the Sanhedrin, you see, under the Torah, under the laws of Moses, if you've broken the Sabbath, that is a justification for death. They were looking for an excuse judicially to kill him. If there was a valid breach of the Sabbath and they got witness of that, then that would have been enough. There is no allegation that he ever broke the Sabbath. Okay, very significant. He's accused of destroying the temple, but not breaking the Sabbath, annulling the Sabbath. There's a positive statement about the Sabbath. Mark chapter 2 verse 27, the Sabbath is made for us. Okay, that implies the continued existence of the Sabbath. And then this one, again, I'll just truncate it. You can see here that the feature of the man of lawlessness, that this imposter that Paul's talking about, is that he is lawless. If he's lawless, that assumes the continuation of the law, doesn't it? Because if the law was abolished in that wider sense of the word, then he could never be described as a man of lawlessness. Okay? He might be an imposter for some other reason. This is just a vignette. It's not part of the discussion, but I'll just say this. This is in the 2nd century AD. They found a papyrus in the middle of Egypt. It appears to be in a portion of a prayer book that must have been familiar in Eastern Christian circles, probably in the 2nd century. Bears unexpected witness to the custom of the Sabbath keeping. It contains what's called a Sabbath prayer, whose liturgical phraseology is easily and closely paralleled in the New Testament and early Christian literature, and follows immediately upon what appears to be the closing words of a prayer for Friday. So what that means is that the church in Egypt in the 2nd century was keeping the Sabbath. And the other thing, if you want an exercise, go to your Google and Google the sacred days of the Armenian saints. There's great leaders in the Armenian church, and they all have a sacred day, right? That's normal, no criticism. But the Armenian church today declares that right from the go-get, from 31 AD, they were a Sunday worshipping church, which is nonsense. The Armenian church worshipped the Sabbath for hundreds and hundreds of years. And you can tell that because the saints' days, all these saint days, are on Saturday. They're not on Sunday, they're on Saturday. While they moved over to be in line with the rest of Orthodoxy, the saint days stayed the days they were. And in about the 11th century in Ethiopia, there was a Sabbath message. There was a great preacher who basically converted most of the people in Ethiopia to the Sabbath keeping. And there was conflict between those who kept Sunday and those who kept Sabbath. Basically, it was the Greeks and the church in Egypt demanding that the Ethiopian church continue to worship on a Sunday. And what happened? The ruler sat down and said, look, we'll resolve that. We'll say you can worship on either day. I don't want everyone killing themselves over this, okay? But the person who led this movement, for his own safety, fled to Armenia, because he could be a Sabbath keeper in Armenia without any problem, because the church in Armenia in the 11th century AD was keeping the Sabbath. Okay, that's a vignette, just move it along from that. And so the interesting thing is that the Jerusalem Council, there's no reference to the Sabbath. And what they say, that means that the Sabbath was gone. No, it doesn't. What it means is that was not a point of conflict in the church, because the council was met to resolve conflicts, not to embrace a total theology of everything. It wasn't a point of conflict, and so that's resolved. And so finally we come to the statement in Hebrews, which is, I think, incredibly beautiful. For if Joshua had given them rest, God will not have spoken later about another day. There remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For whoever enters God's rest also rests from his own work, just as God did from his. Let us therefore make every effort to enter the rest, so that no one will fall by following the same pattern of disobedience. Okay? Thank you very much for your attention. So we'll finish with a hymn. Yep. Next slide. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the light. We thank you for bothering to come back to this earth, that we may be lifted out of the mire of sin. We thank you for the beauty of your word in every respect. We thank you for your commandments, which are fair and just, and more to be desired than gold. Help us, Lord, through today, through the rest of our lives, to keep the commandments, that we may truly enter into the rest that Paul talks about in Hebrews. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.